Hey, welcome to Tabletop Skirmish Games. I'm Lee, and in this video I'll show you how I painted the Red Harvest terrain for Warcry. Here's all the terrain that I'll be painting in this video, but I'll be focusing on four main pieces that you can see here, and I'll be going through all the different stages, showing you how I painted the Varanite effect here, all the different metallic parts of the model, including this awesome part on the pump. I'll go through this kind of dusty effect at the base and the skeletons, and then all the woodwork, showing you how I painted it with different dry brushing techniques. You may be interested in the previous video I've done on choosing colour schemes, and that's up on the channel, but for this I'm pretty much going to be going close to the images I found in the main Red Harvest book. The woodwork's going to have some kind of purple and green tinges to it, and then the metalwork is pretty much going to follow this with almost a gold look. So to get started, I primed everything with a black spray paint. Now I just used a spray paint from a DIY shop. It's a lot cheaper. It ends up being like $3.99 for a can the same size as the ones you'll pay £14 for, and this covered it really well. So I was really happy with how this came out. In the video I'll be using a mix of Vallejo paint and Citadel paints, and we'll be using some different brushes from the regular Citadel brush up to some makeup brushes that are going to give some nice dry brush effects. Put some links in the description below so you know exactly what paints we used and where you can pick them up and save yourself up to 20% as well. Right, let's get started, and we're going to take the red 0.926, the dark Prussian blue, these are Vallejo, and the black 0.950, and we're going to do a mix of these. That first red is a different colour, but just to show you the difference on this red that I'm using, it's a lot more like a plum red, I suppose, and so I'm going to mix that with that nice rich Prussian blue and then give that a mix together, and this is going to give us a nice dark purple colour. If you're using Citadel paints, then just find something that matches this. It doesn't have to be super precise. Then I'm going to take a little bit of that black, and this is just to darken it up a little bit, so I'm mixing that in thoroughly as well. You can see I'm just using a piece of card here because I'm going to be doing kind of like a dry brush, more like an overbrush I suppose with this, and so I want to be quite big and bold with it, quite messy. So I've got a piece of kitchen towel to get a fair amount of the paint off, and then I'll work it on the cardboard before moving on to the terrain piece. Now I'm going to use this as the example, but I've done this same effect over every single part of all the different terrain pieces, and you can see I'm just gently going over it, trying to use the texture of the model, going against the grain as much as I can, and then this is going to give us a real subtle effect. You can barely see it here, but for me it kind of comes through when we start putting all the other layers on. So we're going to repeat this effect, but now we're going to take some of this sky grey and just add a little touch to equal quantities of that same red and blue we used earlier, and this is just going to make a little bit more of a brighter purple. This isn't a highlight, we almost want this as the mid colour, and so we're just going to go over it exactly the same way, dry brushing against that grain, and now you can see we're starting to see that purple. It's very subtle, but this is going to work nicely when we put the terrain on the board later on, and so we go all over it using that grain, trying to go down in different strokes rather than up if I can help it, and then you can see there, you can see some of that purple coming through. We're going to keep the black in the most deepest recesses, so that's going to give us a nice shadow, but it's really that little purple colour coming through which is going to make this work really well. Our next paint is Bugman's Glow, the Citadel Base, and we're going to take this very vegan makeup brush. It's a little bit smaller but still a fair size. I'm going to get a little bit on the brush there, work it into the cardboard, a little bit on the kitchen towel, and then try and get most of that off. So I don't want as much paint on here as when we did the purple earlier, so I'll work it a bit more on the card. And now I'm going to start at the base of every single piece of terrain, and when there's more paint on the brush I want to start that at the very bottom, and then as that paint starts to get used up I'll gently move up and a bit higher, and I'm trying to do downward strokes and then side to side strokes. So I'm trying my best not to do any upward strokes, so I really want to just go down, 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 and then across left to right, and then that's going to give us a really nice dusty effect, and it's going to tie it in to the colour that we can see on the board. Now as I'm going from the base, I'm a bit rougher at the base to apply more paint, so my strokes are a bit stronger, but as I get higher up I'm just being a little bit gentler, and that's going to like feather that effect. So we're going to go from quite thick at the bottom to like lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter as it moves up, and so that's just going to give the effect that that dust has kind of settled on the base and kicked up a little bit onto the different parts of the terrain. And so that's going to work really nicely. It's kind of almost got an, I suppose, like a bit of purple in there, really, like a flesh colour, but with kind of purple. So it's going to work with those previous layers that we did. So that all combined is really going to complement each other. And I think the colours work really well. I've used a lot of influence from the board for this colour scheme, and so that's really playing a big role in the paints I choose. And here you can see it up close. As we move it, we're going to get a different effect as we look down from looking up. So that's exactly what I want. And then I went quite heavy with this on the skeleton as well. We will cover that later on with some contrast paint. I also put some on the little piles of Varanite as well, and just went round dusting it all over the different metal parts of these troughs. Next I took some base Corax white, any white will do, and some Death Guard green. And I like this green because it just was the perfect colour that I was looking for. So I took some of this. I had to really shake it and stir it to get it nice and smooth. It was quite lumpy. So I get a pile of that, but then just a little bit of this green. And so I'm just going to mix that in thoroughly. And this is all to eye. I've got no real measurement for this, but I just want a really, really pale, almost minty green. And you can see the colour we're looking for there. And now with that dry brush, I'm going to go around the edges first of all the woodwork. And I'm being really careful here because I don't want too much of this paint to come off. And so being really gentle until I'm confident how much paint is going to come away from the brush. And then when I'm happy, I can start being a bit quicker, apply a little bit more pressure. But the important thing with this dry brush is to just use this awesome texture that you can see on the model. And really the model does all the work for you here. No skill required. Just make sure you don't have too much paint on the brush, and then just go over and pick out all that awesome texture. So going against the grain is going to work, especially with the wood. And if I chose to go the opposite way, go with the grain, then I'm going to run the risk of some colour going in the cracks, and then that's going to ruin all that work we did earlier with the different purples and also with the black. We want that to be really dark, and that's going to give us the depth, going to give us our shadows. But this is really to give the really dry look. That's the effect I was going for. I wanted this wood to look like it dried out. I don't want any rust on any parts of the metal either, and so I think this works really well for that. It certainly gives the idea that it's underground, dark, dusty, and a bit dirty from all the mining that's going on, but we certainly want to bring out some decent highlight so that when we're playing it does stand out and we can see all the nice details and the features that the terrain give us. And now I'm working on the side, again going from side to side, really trying to get those edges, getting that texture, and even down where we did that Bugman's glow earlier, I'm going over that too, but only in downward strokes or side to side, and I'm being really careful not to go too heavy once I get to the bottom of that, because I really want that Bugman's glow to come through. The next paint is the base paint Leadbelcher, and this is going to be for every single part of metal on every single terrain piece. Now I thought this was going to be quite quick to paint this terrain. I thought a bit of dry brushing, quick bit of metallic work, and we're done. But this took ages. Getting all these metal pieces painted in took a long time. So this certainly isn't a fast piece of terrain to paint and put together, and so don't expect it to be done really quickly, certainly if you want to go for this stage with the metalwork. But I go over it all with one nice coat of Leadbelcher. Then when that's dried, I took some contrast Aggaros dunes, and I'm going to give one coat of that over all the metal. So again, every piece of metal on every piece of terrain, I do it exactly the same way. I've got quite a large brush here, scruffy old brush. I'm not even being really careful here, but I'm just making sure I get it over all the metal. If a little bit goes on the wood, it's pretty much going to go where the metal is touching the wood, and you're not going to see that, and it's going to work well. The kind of level I'm going for here is tabletop ready anyway, so this certainly isn't going to win any prizes, but it's going to get some nice tabletop ready terrain so you can get playing as fast as possible. So I'm going over all this painting here, getting out all the metallic work, and then the next step is to take some contrast skeleton Horde and go over all the skulls and bones that we can see. There's some poking out on the tops here. You've also got skeletons on different parts of the terrain, so don't forget there's other terrain features, and you're going to go through it and you're going to miss little bits. We can go back to it later. But here on this skeleton, I'm a bit more generous with the amount of paint, really getting it in to those nooks and crannies and pushing that paint in there to give us some nice bone colour. Next, I took some Agrax Earthshade, and once that Aggaros dunes are completely dried, I went over it with a fairly decent amount of this Agrax Earthshade. This is optional. I find it gives you a nice, more browner kind of colour, more orangey almost to the gold. So I think it works really nicely. Also adds a bit of grime to those little rivets that stick up. So I think it's worth doing for that. And so I definitely thought that spending those extra few minutes to do this on all the terrain was well worth it. And especially on these pieces, these little heads here with the horns, I think that worked really well. So definitely recommend doing this. Here's that big piece. And this looked really cool with that Aggaros dunes on it, but I felt I needed a bit more depth. So this is where the Agrax Earthshade is going to come in. Works really well. Nice and browny, goldy colour on top of that. And so I'm really going into those areas where the recesses are and pushing that paint in. Again, it's optional, but I found it made a big difference. The next paint is a layer Stormhost Silver, and once all those contrast paints and Agrax Earthshade was completely dry, it's time to move on and do a little bit more dry brushing. So I've got another very vegan makeup brush. This is a little bit smaller, but I'm going to work that paint into the bristles using the kitchen towel, really getting it stuck in, and then use that kitchen towel to get lots of paint off the brush. And now I'm going to be really careful, just really gentle, just to make sure I know exactly how much paint is going to come off. And I'm going to pick out all the raised areas, try and catch the edges, but mostly on these heads, we want that to really stand out and that texture to come through. So doing this is a really nice way to bring that texture out. I'm also trying to catch the edges just gently here, being careful not to go over the wood, and then just running the side of the brush really softly over the most raised areas like the rivets, just to bring those to life as well. I really want to keep that depth to it, but this is where it really starts to bring out the different textures. Now this is the head, and this looked awesome once I got a bit more highlight on there, and so work it on until you're happy. Go gently. You can do a few passes of this, a few layers, but it looks so cool when it was finished. I thought I'd put a bit more on these piles of Varanite as well. So I went in and I've been quite rough. You can see I'm not even worrying about it going over the troughs a little bit. That's going to help with the glow effect we'll get from the next step, where we're going to take some contrast paints, 3 at the same time, contrast Iyanden yellow, Gryph Hound orange, and Blood Angels red. And what I did is I opened these up at the same time, and I started with that red, and I'm going to pick the most raised parts of the Varanite piles, and I'm going to put little blobs of the red, and quite generous here. I'm certainly not like just painting on. I'm putting like blobs so it soaks in to the cracks, and so I'm putting that on the top. And I want these paints to all bleed into each other. So then I cleaned my brush and went on to the Gryph Hound orange, and then I work around the edge of that red, almost blending them together a little bit, and then working my way down to the lower parts of the Varanite piles. Clean my brush again, and then it's on to the Iyanden yellow. This is a nice bright yellow, so this is going to work really well for this. It's almost similar to how, or very similar to how I do the fire effects. So I'm starting to work it in. I'm starting my brush strokes outside on the edges, and then pulling the paint in to the orange and red combination, and then that's going to help this all wet blend together and kind of give an effect of hot, glowing, almost like coals. Then I'm going to take some contrast black Templar, and this is going to be the finishing touch that I do on the top. And now the paint's still a little bit wet underneath, and that's good. We want this to bleed in a little bit, but be careful here you don't put too much on. I just want a little bit of black, and I'm dotting it on the most raised areas, almost where I can see most of the red, and then just dabbing it on, going back to my pot, taking a little bit of paint, and just being very careful not to put too much on, because you could ruin it at this point. So I want the effect to be quite subtle, and so this is just going to give that effect again of where the coals are starting to cool a little bit, maybe where they're higher up and get into the air a bit more, where the rest of it, where it's still really hot, is like a bit brighter. So just be careful not to put too much on at this stage. And with that step complete, we've now finished every single piece of terrain, and if you follow the steps for the wood and the metal, you can just apply it to every piece of the terrain that comes in the Red Harvest box set, and then you're going to have it ready in no time. You can see here we've got the brickwork, and that's come out really well. I think using that Bugman's glow really ties it in to the board nicely. You can see the purple in the board matches with the purple we've got in that brickwork too, and then the black giving us a nice deep dark shadow, which is what we want. And then on here, I was really happy with how this Varanite turned out, and also the combination of using that gold with the wood as well. I think that worked really well. And here you can see That almost fire effect we've got from the contrast works nicely. Once it dries, that black really sets it off and finishes it really well. You could potentially go over this with a little dry brush, maybe of Leadbelcher even, just to make it a little bit extra shiny, but I was happy with it as it is. And then we can see the yellow, as it's dripped and drained down, has given a really nice glow effect over that silver we dry brushed earlier on. Here's the pump, and I was really happy how this came out. It's a great piece of terrain. That skull is so cool at the top, and just with those simple effects, I think you get a really nice, quick and easy finished piece that looks really great on the table. I really love how the highlight just brings this to life, picks out those runes and engravings, and really brings all the textures around those teeth, gums, the eyes, really to life. And then again, the Bugman's glow on the base, just tying it in to the board, works really nicely. Gives that dusty, dry look that you would expect from all that heat coming from the lava in the ground. So a really nice piece of terrain, really happy with that. Then we've got the platforms. You get 2 of these big platforms, and in the photos this highlight dry brush looks really strong, but in real life it's not as bright as you see it here. I mean, this is a good representation of what the top does look like, and here on the edge you can see that that works nicely as well. And then the metal work, just with those few simple techniques, it gives us a good tabletop ready standard to play with. And so yeah, you can see on the top it looks really white there. This is more the lighting I'm using, so it's certainly not that bright. I love these little pieces as well that are dotted around the different terrain parts. Here's one of the platforms, again nice and easy, just wood and metal parts, so they're really quick to finish up. And then we've got this cool thing, this got the buckets that wind round, so another piece of machinery. And so all the same techniques, nothing different here. At the bottom, again, that Bugman's glow coming through. With the buckets, I just went over with those 2 purple colours, and then Bugman's glow, because I thought that would be scooping up all the dust and everything, so I figured I'd just mix it up a little bit there. But these metal parts painted exactly as you saw in the video, so everything's done in exactly the same way. And there we go, there's all the terrain laid out, and it looks awesome on the board. There's so much here, you can build it in so many different ways. It certainly took a lot longer than I thought to paint with all the metal parts, but it's well worth it. Almost 2 extra sessions that I didn't expect. So here we go though, it's finished and I'm really happy, and now can get playing with it actually painted properly, which is much more fun. But it looks really cool, so interactive with the new rules, and I've done a video on those if you want to check it out. But the different golds and all the colours coming from that lava and the Varanite I think work nicely. Having these little platforms that you can climb across or up and down, and the ladders as well, gives lots of choices for your fighters to move around the board. But all up, some of the best terrain I think so far, certainly for Warcry, and I'm really happy with this set. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope it gave you a good idea of some simple techniques you could use for your terrain to get it tabletop ready for battle. I'll put the links to all the paints I've used in the description below, so if you want to check those out and then follow the links, you can get up to 20% off. They're affiliate links, won't cost you anything extra, and you'll be supporting the channel as I'll get a small commission from every sale made. So thanks so much for that, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching. Please like if you like it, subscribe for more videos like this, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to join me next time on Tabletop Skirmish Games. If you like this kind of content and would like to support the channel, then please check out my Patreon page, and thanks to everyone who's joined so far. It's really awesome. We hang out on Discord, talk about the hobby, share ideas and help each other out, and you'll get some perks there that you're not going to find anywhere else. So I'll put a link in the description, and it'd be great to see you there.